All Christians are exempt from a 10% tithe.
Thank you.
The word tithe just means a tenth. But the word tithing, the doctrine of tithing, is something totally different. Tithing in the Scriptures is a doctrine, a teaching, a law, a principle, a commandment. And it's a specific thing. It's not some general nebulous nonsense. It's a specific thing. Tithing in the Bible, by law, under the law of Moses, was the children of Israel. If you're not of the children of Israel, you're out. Had to pay a tithe on the increase of their production. If you don't have an increase, you don't pay. On the land only. If you were a shoemaker, you didn't pay tithe on shoe. If you were a fisherman, you didn't pay tithe on fish. If you made the wagons that carried in the tithe, you didn't pay tithe on the profit for making wagons. You only paid tithes on the produce of the land and the herds. Only. You paid that tithe only to the Levites and the priests. No one else. Then it gets more complicated. You have the third tithing, and you have the festival tithe where you spent the money on yourself. You went to a place where God placed His name, where you'd keep the 3 seasonal feasts, Pentecost, Tabernacles. You would take your tithes with you so you'd have food to eat. If it was too far, you could sell the tithes, take the money, and wherever you went, buy food. When the temple was destroyed, there's no more tithing. There was no more Levitical priesthood. So tithing is a thing of the past. It's an impossibility to tithe scripturally today. Because you would have to be an Israelite who is a farmer, who tithes to the tribe of Levi only for temple services. None of those things exist. You can't tithe. Okay? You can give. You can give money, you can give contributions, and that's fine. And Paul said God loves a cheerful giver, not a cheerful tithe payer, a cheerful giver. Christ never collected a tithe. The apostles never collected a tithe. Paul never taught the Gentiles to tithe. There's not one example of anyone tithing to the New Testament church in the New Testament. Not one example. There's 2 examples where Christ talked about the Pharisees who tithed on mint and, cumin and all these little herbs. And he said, that's fine, that's tithable, but you should do the weightier matters of the law. That was not a weighty matter of the law. And those Pharisees who did tithe meticulously were not justified. Then there was the publican and the sinner who went up to the temple to pray, if you remember, and the one says, man, I tithe everything. The Pharisee, I fast twice a week, I do all this stuff. Didn't do him a bit of good. He said, that man did not go down to his house justified. Those are the only 2 examples of tithing in the New Testament. Both of them, the people that did the tithing stood condemned. But the sinner who wouldn't even put his eyes up to heaven, said, forgive me a sinner, he said, no, that man went home justified. And I can go on and on and on. Tithing is a Christian hoax. They did not tithe in the first century church. Why do you think they had all things common in the book of Acts, chapter 5? Because everybody was giving 10% of their gross income? Are you crazy? Paul went hungry most of the time. Do you think if he collected 10% of all Asia, he wouldn't have enough to eat? He didn't tithe. You think Paul Crouch is rich? Paul the Apostle would have been a multi-millionaire. He made tens. He worked. He wasn't collecting tithes. It's nonsense. It's a hoax. First century Christians didn't teach. Second century, third century. It was about the 4th or 5th century, 400 or 500 years after Christ established His church, that the Catholic Church made it a law that everybody had to tithe. Not just farmers, everybody. Shoemakers, bookkeepers, bakers, everybody had to tithe. Now, why did they have to make that a law? Because it's not in the Scriptures. They made it up. And the whole Protestant world bows down to it.